Hey, Brian.
What's going on, Scott?
Thanks for being on the podcast today.
You bet. How are you?
Well, it's like pretty rare for us to be in the office together because you've been Mr. Sailor.
I did. I've been out and about quite a bit. And
we're gonna do that on the podcast here soon.
Yeah,
so
we'll
Northwest
talk about
Passage,
some travel.
Northwest Passage with Brian McVickers. That is an incredible accomplishment, and I can't wait to hear all the stories from that.
It's a pretty exciting story, especially when you go back to all the planning involved and the execution was pretty phenomenal.
And you've been wanting to do this 5 years, 6 years, since you did your Greenland thing.
Yeah.
And how long ago was that?
That was 2017.
Okay, so yeah.
And that was the first time I got to see big ice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to hear all of the stories and it's just good to be back in the office. I finished the big trip. You finished, the Northwest Passage.
Yeah.
I just finished my first book, and we'll talk some more about that in the future as well.
Milestone.
So big milestones all the way around. And also I think big milestones for the industry. The industry continues to grow and flourish, and we're seeing more and more, not only OEMs, tire manufacturers, companies that normally try to reach a very broad audience are now specifically targeting overlanding because they can see the benefit of interacting not only with brands like ours, but also with the community.
Yeah, and that's an interesting. It's kind of the topic of today's podcast is a little bit of a look at the overland market, if you will, new products that have come out, and some of the the companies that are kind of making movements within the space.
Yeah,
and I think what we've seen from a high level, more business oriented aspect is you've seen a lot of companies that they were acquired.
Yeah, sure.
Over 2022, 2023.
A lot of consolidation.
A lot of consolidation. And with the consolidation, you get a lot of retraction.
I want to take a moment for a special announcement of our newest video series on the Expedition Portal YouTube channel that features exploring the Smoky Mountains and the East Coast. This multi-part series is presented by Hankook Tires and is hosted by renowned explorer and photographer Sinway Xavier. This series will start at the end of September and run through all of October, featuring a Trail Scout episode, a Jeep Gladiator feature vehicle, trip planning and preparation, and some installments showing the local artisans and places to visit around the Smoky Mountains. We appreciate Hankook's ongoing support of the Overland community and this podcast. Mm-hmm.
So I think late 2023, early 2024, we saw almost a softening in this space.
And plus the after of the pandemic effect and everything.
Well, that's part of the reason for the retraction.
Yeah, sure.
You've got a lot of investment that comes in that's expecting one result.
Yes.
And I don't know if that result was based off of the pandemic spike, it might have been a little bbit unrealistic.
Sure.
And then as that result was not achieved, then they started to retract, bring everything kind of down to a zero base, and then try to rebuild from there. So we saw a lot of that at the beginning of the year. And the benefit that we're seeing now is a lot of those companies have restructured. They've got new people in place. Mm-hmm. They've got new strategies in place, and they're going into 2025 with a bit of fresh eyes, a little bit more of a positive attitude. So I look forward to what the next probably 6 months has to come.
Yeah, and I would think if you were just to draw a line of growth and you excluded the pandemic, we're still in the same arc of growth that we would have been if the pandemic hadn't happened. There's just was this little correction here in the last year or so.
I saw a really interesting graph yesterday that kind of showed it was for accessorized vehicle acquisition. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is four-wheel drive vehicles that people have invested in with rooftop tents and camp kitchens and all the equipment, right? It also included big expedition trucks, something like an Earth Roamer.
Sure.
And then it included vans, right? So built-out vans. And you see this nice big curve, and so those numbers are still going up. So people are still acquiring four-wheel drives, vans, and big expedition trucks. But it was interesting to see the big spikes, and the big spikes were from the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to let you try to guess because I think you figure it out. But what's a significant thing that's developed kind of towards the end of 2022 that allowed people to get outside more?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's Starlink and stuff.
Starlink.
It's the ability to communicate.
So on this graph, there was a spike for the pandemic, and then there was a spike for when Starlink had its full launch at the end of 2022. Sure. So people realized, hey, we can get out. We don't have to stay in one place as much as we normally do. But it was really interesting to see how Starlink stimulated growth in the outdoor market.
Well, and I mean, think about how you and I work. It is such a boon. I mean, the fact that you were able to work on the sailboat is an example for you. The fact that I, was able to, across Africa, be able to have broadband internet.
Right.
And I used the full-size Starlink that it was converted by unique componentry. But we'll kind of kick into the first product here. So Starlink has launched the Starlink Mini. For those that are on the video here, you can see it. And this unit actually has a cradle that's integrated in it on the back.
And those are magnets?
And these are magnets. That's why it's stuck to the table. So this cradle is engineered and produced by Unique Componentry. It's just an awesome little company, really passionate, husband and wife team that are just crushing it. But what's really important about the Starlink Mini is that it operates from 12 to 48 volts. So it doesn't need 120 volts in order to operate. Like normally, Starlink, you'd plug it into a wall socket. You can on this. There is a wall socket adapter. But in this particular case, I just have a 12-volt plug plugged directly into it. So I'm not having any parasitic loss.
So you're plugging it into a cigarette lighter?
Yeah. You can plug it into a cigarette lighter.
So I think I sent you the video of somebody who took a Milwaukee M18 cordless drill battery.
That was awesome.
And created a little cradle for it. And supposedly that M18 battery from Milwaukee will run the Starlink Mini for 8 hours.
Yeah, I believe it.
So now it's a completely portable. You can throw it in a backpack.
Yeah, true. I
mean, that I thought was really neat to see.
Yeah, and a little lithium battery that's so lightweight. And then you can see on the Unique Componentry little cradle here, I've got these magnetic feet. They've also got stick-on steel pads, ferrous pads, so it sticks to those. But then you can also run it off of USB-C. So I also have another cable here, which I just got, so that's why I'm going to be converting over to this. But you can run any of that high output USB-Cs, you can run the Starlink on. So it needs to be like that 60 to 100 watt range of power, and the cable needs to be rated to that as well. But once you get into that range, then you end up being able to provide the wattage that the unit needs to run. But it's just literally a USB-C with the right little connector, weatherproof connector on it.
The Starlink Mini is about half the size of the previous model.
I think so, and about half the power consumption.
And how long do you think it took them to develop the Starlink Mini? So they launched the bigger one, and then how long until the Starlink Mini?
Within 2 years.
2 years.
And what's going to come next is it's going to all be in your phone.
In one unit.
That's right. Yeah. So you're going to have smartphones that are compatible with Starlink. Starlink has launched SpaceX has launched a new constellation that has better output for handheld devices. The reason why the antennas were so big in the beginning is that they needed to be able to have the smallest amount of signal to noise ratio loss as possible through the gain that's available in the size of the antenna. So as they've continued to refine that and improve their constellation, they are able to go with smaller and smaller antennas. So now the Starlink Mini, I stick it on the quartermaster between the little Safari windows on the top, and it just runs
right in there.
Yeah, it just runs while you're going down the road.
Sure.
Plugged into 12 volt, and it's just I mean, it's like you said, it literally has changed an industry because people are now able to work remotely with broadband, and it's affordable, $150 a month.
Yeah, and we see them. I mean, to jump ahead a little bit, we were in Nunavut, Canada, in these little villages. I mean, we're talking up around 73 degrees.
Yeah, sure.
And every house had a Starlink unit on the roof.
I believe it.
So it's really, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and like what an incredible thing for those communities, in good ways and in bad. But the most important, like their kids have access now to different types of education that they may not have had before. They have access to communicating with loved ones and relatives that may live in different areas at really high quality, because those communities are quite isolated. Now, of course, it also is going to bring in social media.
That's where the bad part is.
That's right. And those
it's kind of nice to be isolated sometimes.
Yeah, we need to be more than what we are, because I was talking with someone today actually, and they were asking about the process of writing the book, which is it's the hardest thing I've ever done. South Pole's got nothing on writing a book. Right. But it was this interesting thing of like them saying, I wish I had time to do something like that. And I said, I bet you if you totaled up your Instagram scroll time.
Yeah, you could write 3 books.
You could write a book in a year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just something to think about.
So how long do you think it took you to write the book?
Well, it's been a 7-month project, but I spent about 6 to 10 hours a week, but I just had the manuscript deadline this week. So it was an enormous amount of time, and I'm fairly exhausted by it. So I actually sent off the last piece of the manuscript this morning at 2:30 in the morning.
Nice.
So I'm going on the euphoria of being done.
Sure.
But 103,000 words.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that content, I would imagine, came second nature to you.
Some of it did, but it's interesting. There's this process about, like when you write something for the web, it is usually something that's more immediate, more timely. And if you make a mistake, you can go back in and fix it. Whereas in a book, it's something that's meant to be on the shelf for a long period of time. This type of book, which we'll share the details of later, but it is something that is meant to be a little more evergreen. Yeah. So you have to be really mindful of not putting in something that could be changed very soon, and then also making sure that the concepts are more evergreen. So I just found myself really having to do a lot of research and a lot of thinking about concepts that have distilled down 20 years of work.
Right.
So it was a very important process for me. I learned a lot about myself and about overlanding through the process of having to think about it in terms of sharing it with a large audience.
Yeah.
So,
how do you communicate that to somebody else?
Which will only serve to benefit the podcast and the magazine. You're going to see content from that in the magazine, everything else over the years to come. So a lot of learning that came from that. And it's with Simon & Schuster, which is an incredible partner to be able to be
name.
To be associated with. So so that's the interesting thing about connecting in with social media, is that it can take a lot of time, and it can take us away from actually doing the thing that we're most interested about on Instagram. So if you're looking at
you're watching other people do it,
that's right, and you're not going and doing it yourself. So I heard a very cool quote not all that long ago of like, talking about the thing isn't doing the thing, planning to do the thing isn't doing the thing, buying all of the products to be able to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Like, you've got to eventually do the thing.
Well, and you have to make an effort to disconnect. I just recently went and did a little kayak float down the Colorado River up near Lee's Ferry, and it's a 16-mile, make it 2 days with an overnight, right? And
how awesome is that, though? And
you go do a backhaul,
okay,
right, where you go to Lee's Ferry boat dock and you get onto basically it's a deck boat, kind of like a pontoon boat, and they run you up river, up against the current, and then they drop you off all the way at the top. And then you float it back down. But along the way...
At the dam?
At the dam.
Okay.
Yeah, Glen Canyon Dam. And I had done it a couple of years ago, and there was no cell signal, no service, anything like that. And this year on the way up there, going up to the dam, the backhaul boat driver kind of said, hey, if you guys need, we've got signal up here now. There's a couple of bars. You can get phone calls in and out. You can get some data. As soon as she told us that, I turned my phone off, and I hid it deep in my bag. And I was like, otherwise, it's there.
Yeah.
Right? And so I barely took any pictures. I used other people's phones to take pictures, and I was just like, just get it away from me.
What a cool experience, though. I mean, so when are you in like a longer kayak, single-person kayak, two-person kayak?
Everybody on the trip did single-person kayaks.
Okay.
couple of dry bags. We just did a single overnight.
But that's awesome.
Yeah, you take a little 2-person tent, and we went pretty light and fast, and it was great. So
yeah, I've heard anyone who's ever done a Colorado River trip like that has spoken so highly of the experience. I think that there's got to be something about being in such a significant, in the water, out in nature, but also in this canyon that's like nothing else on the planet.
Yeah, it's pretty narrow, and the walls, I don't know what the height was. It had to be 500 to 700 feet.
Wow.
Up to the top of these cliffs, and they just go sheer up from the water.
Yeah.
And half the time you're in the shade, half the time you're in the sun, and it changes throughout the day, and it changes every time you go around a corner. It changes. It was pretty special.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's only, from where we're at, it's 4.5 hours to get there.
Yeah.
So it's pretty convenient.
Well, there's a great example of turning off your phone and going and doing it.
Yeah.
That's
good.
A
lot of fun.
So we always like to feature new companies here on the podcast. So we've got this Tommy block by Freedom Recovery Gear. It's a very unique product in the fact that it has this composite reinforced cover over a 6061 aluminum block with, it's not a bearing, but it does have some graphite anti-resistance or anti-friction sleeves in there. But there's a couple things about the block that I think is really interesting. So on the block itself, it shows you the angle that you would be at with the rope, like if you were doing a misdirected pull, and how much of a force multiplier that would be. It shows it right on the block.
And so talk more about that. So the larger the angle, the less the amplification.
That's right. Because the angle would be out and directly back to the vehicle. If you're going from the winch on the vehicle through the block and back to the vehicle again, then you're going to get that 2 times.
Like a full 2 times.
2 times,
yeah.
Minus any parasitic loss in the block itself.
Right. But if you go back, say, 45 degrees versus 180 degrees,
yeah,
it would, whatever that would be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then it changes the amount of mechanical advantage. So I thought that was interesting. It looks like a really safe unit too. It uses a Dyneema shackle here as well. The way that it houses the shackle through it, and you can easily replace it, it looks like as well. It comes with a couple extra ones. Its working load limit with a 4.1 factor is at 13,100 pounds. Which the interesting thing about that is, and this thing only weighs 3 pounds too. So putting it in that context, it's probably not the best pulley block if you had an earth roamer. This is going to be a pulley block that's going to be appropriate for a standard 4-wheel drive.
It'd be great for your Jeep Wrangler or your Land Cruiser.
That's right. So we have to think about pulley blocks from the perspective of pulley blocks can double the pulling power of a winch. So this block here, where it's being attached to the tree with the shackle, is actually seeing twice the rated, or twice the output of the winch. Mm-hmm. So if you have a 9,000 pound winch, you have the theoretical maximum pulling power of 18,000 pounds. Normally you don't see those kinds of loads, and we're going to do some testing with it using a strain gauge, because I think it'll be very interesting to see.
You've got a lot more multipliers and external forces when you get up to that.
You do. So you just got to be careful. Like if you have a 12,000 pound winch and you're doing really heavy winching, or you have a heavy vehicle, you could exceed that 13,100 pound working load limit. But there's a significant safety factor. There's a 4-time safety factor built into the block. So it has a minimum braking strength of 52,500 pounds. So even in those scenarios, the block is probably fine. So, but it's really good that they are listing the working load limit and the minimum braking strength of the block right on the block itself. But it's just a beautifully made piece here. It's made in Canada. If you look at Freedom Recovery Gear, they just have some really thoughtful products, really high quality products. Just the fact that it's half the weight.
The chafe guards are thoughtful.
Yeah.
And even with the housing, when you really take a look at it, and I've never looked at a snatch block in the sense of it's so minimalistic. Mm-hmm. It looks like the plastic housing, you can see where you could almost do without it.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So I think the plastic housing really serves as a guide for the winch line.
It does hold the shackle kind of in position and out of the way of what would be the other lines.
Yeah. But when you look at that compared to, say, we're used to the full steel.
Yeah.
The full steel housing with the snatch block on the inside, you realize how much
there's a lot
of unnecessary weight.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, I mean the side plate material is ultra high strength fiber reinforced composite. The sheave itself is made from 6061 billet aluminum. The axle is hard anodized 6061 aluminum, and then it does have this aluma bronze bushing with graphite inserts to help reduce some of the friction. So and it only weighs 1,350 grams, so 3 pounds with the soft shackle.
Well, it's this combination of old technology and new. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, the soft shackle adds a little bit of weight, but yeah, it's a really neat product. I love to see innovation like that. Recovery and recovery tools and recovery rigging is such a fascinating subject, and there's so much to learn. There's a lot of training that's necessary. I just encourage people to get training anytime you're doing vehicle-based recovery. But yeah, I find it to be a fascinating, very technical subject to learn about.
And especially in the vehicle space when it comes to recovery equipment, there's not a whole lot of new innovation. What I mean by that is traditionally we've seen some great products in the off-road space.
Yeah.
But if you look a little bit closer, you realize, that came from the marine industry.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of it came from sailboats.
Or that came from the heavy equipment rigging industry.
That's right.
Right. And so the off-road space is always kind of borrowed from those existing, product lines.
That's right.
Whereas you're now starting to see, like even a few years ago when they came out with just the standalone sheave.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
The aluminum.
Yep.
That
friction sheave.
Yeah, the friction sheave. And at the time it was like, wow, what an amazing innovation. It's like, well, yeah, but they've been doing it in the marine industry for the last decade.
Sailbaits have been running that for a long time.
Yeah, so it's a great way to borrow technology.
Yeah, and I think it's probably part of the reason why the sailing is so appealing to overlanders is that there is all of that crossover of those a
lot of similarities,
interesting things. I think so. Well, one of the things that I wanted to chat about today was the fact that I had the opportunity to go after the big trip in Africa. I had the opportunity to go spend some time with the new 250 Land Cruiser. So it's the 250 series Land Cruiser, which would be sold in the U.S. under the Land Cruiser nameplate. It'll be sold in other markets as a Prado. It'll be sold again in other markets as a Prado Land Cruiser. It'll be sold as a Land Cruiser 2, but it's all the same vehicle for the most part. There's a couple things that I'm really excited about with it. This, more than any time in the past, is truly a global standardized vehicle. So they do have it in diesel in other markets, but this new hybrid gas drivetrain is being sold in a lot of other markets as well. So if you were to buy this new Land Cruiser, if you did need service and support, that car is going to be sold in a lot of other countries.
So as a world travel vehicle,
I think so.
Very appropriate.
I think it's very appropriate. And it also is based on this new FG platform that's being used in the 300 series Land Cruiser, the Tundra, the Sequoia, even the Tacoma. So it's this family of vehicles chassis that is very stiff. It is very strong, but it's also very lightweight with how they assemble it. And I've watched these chassis be assembled in the plant, all by robotics, incredible quality. Sure. And as you would expect from Toyota. It uses this 4-cylinder hybrid powertrain, which some people might like, some people might not, but just the fact that you can get a Land Cruiser that's going to get low to mid 20s fuel economy, that's kind of unheard of. So
anything that gets that is
that's
great.
Right. That's so remember that 80 series that we had? That thing got negative fuel economy. It was like 11 miles a gallon, I think is what it got.
I think I saw 8.
Well, you were driving it.
I was. When I drove it, we got 8. So how was it to drive? Because I've only seen the new Land Cruiser 250. I saw it when they first launched it. Went to the launch event at at the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum
Right.
with Greg Miller and,
Yeah.
and the whole gang there. And, the reaction when they unveiled it was like any other, new vehicle reveal, a bit mixed.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Because you've got the kind of the legacy brand or the legacy product that it's replacing. And you've got that audience of consumers who is just dedicated to that, the 80 series, 100 series,
Right.
200 series, and then the 250 to come out with such a departure from the trajectory that the 80, 100, and 200, even the 300 was on this trajectory of like kind of this bigger and more rounded design. And then you got the 250, which is now all of a sudden more relatable to a 4Runner than to a Land Cruiser.
For sure. And the 4Runner and the new Land Cruiser 250 share many of the same components, including drivetrain. There's a lot of similarities between the two. I think the most important thing is usually the perspective of that is someone that just doesn't have experience with the Prado and the Prado Land Cruiser history. It is very common. This product has existed in a form just like this for decades.
Yeah, we just don't get to see it.
That's right. So someone says, "Oh, that's not a Land Cruiser." Well, they've been calling Prados Land Cruisers for a very long time, all the way back to the LJ78, which was a Prado Land Cruiser, and it was built on a light duty drivetrain. It used the drivetrain from the Hilux and the Surf, and it had a little diesel engine and all that. We had one of those. It was an awesome little vehicle. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I think it would be a mistake to say that this isn't a great vehicle. It is not a replacement for the 300 because they make the 300.
Right.
The 300 is available. Unfortunately, the only version of the 300 that we get is the one from Lexus. Now, the Lexus is a beautiful vehicle. The LX600 is a proper full-size Land Cruiser with different sheet metal and certainly different trim. It's very luxury biased, and it doesn't have all the off-road hardware of the 300. And I've driven the 300 in Dubai. I've driven the 300 in South Africa, and it's awesome. If it was available, it'd probably be the car that I would own because there's so many things about it that I love.
Well, I kind of feel like at least in the United States and what's available here, it's like the GX550.
Yes.
Would be our replacement of, say, the full-bodied Land Cruiser. Right?
I think it is in a lot of people's mind, even though the 550 is the same chassis as the new Land Cruiser 250. It's the same vehicle.
Right, but you don't see that on the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It does look the most appropriate.
Yeah, as far as the larger body,
yes.
I think some of them are even 7-seat.
Yes.
So that larger vehicle is kind of along that design element of what we think of the Land Cruiser in the United States.
Yeah.
Whereas the Prado, the 250 and the Prado line coming here it's kind of refreshing to have that mid-size SUV versus a full-size SUV if you put them in those terms.
And what's interesting is that the market, it's been so interesting to watch the Overland community adopt the Lexus GX as one of their favorites. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think Lexus has done a masterful job of like that Overtrail Plus is like an incredible package from the factory. You end up with a V6 as opposed to a 4-cylinder. And because it's a 7-passenger, you end up with quite a bit more payload. So my only real criticism of the Land Cruiser 250 is in some of the trims, the variants that we had on this drive, the payload was less than 1,000 pounds.
Yeah,
so
that gets pretty skinny.
It really does. So if you're the kind of person who likes to load your vehicle up with a bunch of people, like let's just as an example, let's put 4 people, a husband, wife, 2 kids, some of their luggage and gear, and then they want to pull a small trailer. And that small trailer has a 350-pound tongue weight. Mm-hmm. That 350-pound tongue weight now goes against the payload.
You're already over.
You're already way over, and you haven't even put really any accessories on the vehicle. So there's not a lot of headroom. Now, we all know that a 250 Land Cruiser, a Prado, and all of those vehicles are properly built. And there's a lot of reserve capacity in those vehicles. But try to explain that to your insurance company when you're 1,000 pounds overweight. You're like, well, but they're really strong. It's a Land Cruiser, and they don't care because.
So how was it? So I've never driven it. I've only sat in it and seen it. But, so you're 6'1",
6'1", yeah,
6'1", broad shoulder. You get in this car, or you get in a Land Cruiser 250, and it's not really big inside.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a rest of the world vehicle, which I have to admit that I like. There's something familiar to me. I've spent a lot of time in Prados around the world, and the Prado is one of my favorite vehicles. I mean, it's like the reason why the 4Runner is so awesome is because it is that compromise between so many different things, including cost. Mm-hmm. You can get a Land Cruiser 1958 for like around $50,000.
That's what they're intending.
If you can get it.
But I've heard different stories from
people trying to get it from the dealer. Yeah, it's insane.
I've heard some crazy stories about the dealership network.
Eventually it'll come down, but the fact that you can get, like, whereas a 300 series Land Cruiser, the way that you and I would want it, is going to be pushing $100,000.
Right.
So it's almost half the price, and it has a rear locking differential. So, it's just...
Which is nice.
And then you can get the front sway bar disconnect, which is also really nice. There's a lot to love about the vehicle. I think that it's just a lot of saber rattling to say this isn't a Land Cruiser. Of course it is. Like, just look at it historically. It's a Land Cruiser.
A lot of people have to inject drama into every vehicle launch. It doesn't matter what it is.
Exactly. So. Yeah. I mean, it is the nameplate. There's nothing new about the nameplate.
Yeah. There's two of them running around town here in
and
Prescott,
they look great,
and they're good looking trucks.
They are. In fact, that's a great point, Brian. It is a very handsome vehicle. Yeah. And so is the GX550. I mean, these are Toyota and Lexus are putting out, I think, some of the best looking new cars that they have in a really long time. The tech is all really good. Overall, I really liked the vehicle. I can see why they're going to sell a lot of them. And here's the other thing too, just to be fair to Toyota. So when they were selling the Land Cruiser, the last 200 series Land Cruiser, the last year they sold a little bit better, but the year before that they sold around 2,800 units.
Right.
They're selling that in a weekend with this new 250. Yeah. I mean, like, they're going to sell 40,000 of these things this year. So, it's really what the market needed was this vehicle. So I think it's important to remind ourselves that we want Toyota to be successful. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why we don't get exactly the cars that we want is because we don't buy them.
So then what's the plan? What's the plan with the 4Runner?
Yeah,
a lot of people feel like the 250 is kind of replacing the 4Runner. But what I've noticed with Toyota is they have a plan. They always have a plan.
A long-term plan.
So when they pulled the Land Cruiser out of the United States market, before the 200 series, and everybody felt abandoned.
Yeah.
This whole thing with the 250 was already in play.
For sure.
Right.
They had to have known.
They've got a plan that's going 5 to 10 years out from today.
Right.
We just don't hear about it until it's closer to happening.
Yeah, the new 4Runner, I was able to spend some time with that as well, sit in it. I wasn't able to drive it. The driving experience will likely be very similar. The vehicle isn't as tall, doesn't have quite as much interior space. The vehicle
compared to the current?
The 250 Land Cruiser.
Okay, how does it compare to the current 4Runner?
A little bit bigger.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit bigger. And overall, I mean, the current 4Runner is one of the best cars ever made for a lot of reasons. But it's interesting to see this new 4Runner because it'll have rear locking differential, it'll have sway bar disconnect, it's got all of the most advanced crawl control and everything else like that on it. It has a larger wheel well. It looks like it would be more of like a recreational four-wheel driving solution for people, whereas the 250 is going to have more interior space. It's going to be easier to configure for carrying things on the inside like you would for overlanding. So I think that what you'll find is day-to-day driving, recreational four-wheel drivers will lean towards the 4Runner, whereas you'll see like travelers, a little bit older demographic
going
with the Land Cruiser. Yeah. But there is a lot of crossover between the two, and I do not mean to dismiss that because they are very, very similar, including the drivetrain. So the chassis is the same, drivetrain's the same. The bodies are quite different.
And what about price? Is there any
we don't
information
know.
on intended price point?
Yeah, we don't know pricing on Forerunner yet. But that'll be really interesting to see when it comes out. Because if the Forerunner is if it's less money, which it does have less content in some packages, that could be an even greater reason.
Could you imagine a $35,000 Forerunner?
Yeah, that would be amazing.
That'd be really great.
Yeah, you can't even buy a 7-year-old one for that right now. Yeah, because they're that awesome.
Oh, and my Gen 3's got a little cult following.
Your Gen 3 is like it's literally one of the greatest vehicles ever made. And my favorite meme that I've seen in years was a picture of and it was actually looked exactly like your truck, the silver and everything else like that. And they said Toyota has recalled the Gen 3 Forerunner because it's time for you to buy a new car.
It lasts forever.
I know, it's well, I mean, your kid drives it. I mean, the thing, the fact that it survived you as well as it did,
right? And now
being the precision performance driver that you are,
you got to push it hard.
Yeah, and then now your kid, it's probably getting a bit of a break.
Well, it was funny. So apparently there's a gold one or a brown one on the next street over from us, and it's this old lady's got it for sale. She's probably the original owner.
Yeah.
And it's for sale. And Max came home and he's like, Dad, there's a Forerunner for sale. I'm like, where? What is it? And we were driving someplace else and he pointed it out to me and I'm like, buddy, that's the exact car that you already have.
And a special thanks to Real Truck for their support of this week's podcast. Find your freedom and follow your own trail in the fresh air of vast, uncharted places. Introducing the exclusive Real Truck lineup of overlanding accessories designed to take adventurous explorers just like you into the furthest reaches, with gear for camping, off-roading, and more, including the all-new Real Truck Go Rack, Go Tent, and Overland awning. And here's to those inspired, self-actualized, brave souls that are ready to unplug and check in to pure wilderness. Bring your truck to life at realtruck.com.
And he goes, I know, but that one's a little bit different. I'm like, no, it's the exact same car. But she was selling it for $12,000.
I believe it. I believe it.
It was pretty impressive.
I mean, the Forerunner is the least expensive car that you can own.
Yeah.
Because if you look at depreciation now, of course, it does cost some money to buy one. But if you calculate in depreciation, it is the cheapest car you can own. It's less expensive to own than a Honda Fit. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yeah, over time, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, all right, so let's go through our list here. We also spent some time with the Tacoma, and I was not a huge fan of the last round of Tacoma for a couple reasons. Like they hadn't addressed some things that needed to be addressed. The 6-speed automatic, the first gear was just too tall, and the engine didn't make enough power. That Atkinson cycle V6 it was fine. It was reliable. It just wasn't a great car.
Yeah.
And it allowed for a lot of the other OEMs to catch up to Toyota. But if you look at the current Tacoma, the one that just came out, it has a 9-speed automatic. It has a lower first gear. It has a more powerful engine, and it's available in a hybrid, which means you're getting all of that torque from the motor generator. I don't remember how it's configured, but you get all that torque from the electric motor when you're pulling away from a stoplight or whatever. So you can really
makes up for the first gear.
Yeah, and the first gear is also lower. So, okay. And it's turbocharged. So you're getting we were at altitude in Colorado, and the thing drove great.
Yeah.
Overall, the refinement of the chassis is much better. The ride quality is significantly better. It's now coil sprung in the rear, disc brakes in the rear, and they have some really thoughtful Overland specific changes that they've made to the vehicle. The payload is up by about 20% over the previous generation, which that's
a big deal.
That's a big deal because the Tacoma needed to have a higher payload. You can get a this new Trail Hunter package, which has a wider track, a 33-inch diameter tire, rear locking differential, front sway bar disconnect, and 1,215 pounds of payload. And there's a couple things on the truck that you could remove. Like it's got this little bed rack in it. You could take out the rear seat. You could start to gain some additional payload reserve. But it also comes with an ARB bumper from the factory that is high clearance, gross vehicle weight rated, recovery points on both sides.
So is it a winch ready bumper?
No, it's in the rear. It doesn't have a winch provision, but unfortunately, they don't have a front ARB. It's just a rear.
It's a rear ARB.
Just a rear ARB bumper. The one thing, there's a couple downsides to it. I don't like the fact that they spec'd it with an 18-inch wheel.
Yeah.
You really want to have a 17 or a 16-inch wheel on an Overland vehicle. That's primarily for accessibility to tires when you're traveling internationally, but it also makes a huge difference in the amount of flotation. So I don't like the fact that it went to an 18-inch wheel. It should have been 17s, but it looks like 17s will still fit.
I want to be excited about a Tacoma.
Yeah.
Or the Tacoma.
Yeah, you're not feeling it?
I've never felt a Tacoma. It's never done it for me. And I think part of the reason it's never done it for me is that it's like there's a lot of them. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they are. They're very common.
And the people who have them are so excited about them.
Yeah, they're very excited about their Tacoma.
Yeah, so. and I've driven a lot of Tacomas.
Yeah, sure.
Because of everything we do.
Yeah, sure.
And I've driven them a whole bunch, and I'm just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
It's never been, really exciting. It's never been a really exciting vehicle for me.
Yeah.
That said, I also drive a 4-door Wrangler, and those are everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And everybody's really excited about those, but I like that one a little bit more than the Tacoma for a lot of reasons, but I don't know what it is about the Tacoma. So I really hope that this next one,
it has
exciting.
Shock absorbers in the seats on the TRD Pro. So
that's different.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, which hopefully they make that optional on future models, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just you can't put a human being in the back seat anymore, so it just takes up too much space.
Oh, because of the suspension seats.
Yeah, the suspension seats. They are cool. They work. It's not a gimmick. It takes up a lot of space.
Okay.
In the back seat, so it's going to be very much the guy who wants to do like the go fast kind of program. Kind of program. But I think the key to a Tacoma is it's just an honest, reliable pickup truck. And they also have good resale value, so people don't lose their shorts on them. So at every touch point you think that a 25-year-old has to a Tacoma, they're having a positive experience. The thing starts and runs every time. It's capable off-road. And then when they go to trade it in because they want to get a Land Cruiser or something else.
Still has some value.
Yeah, they've done well on it. So every connection point that people have, and in Toyotas in general, they're having all of these touch points are having really positive experiences. They are capable, they are reliable, they are durable.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where people have these really positive outcomes with Toyotas. The something that's different about a Wrangler is that you could take the top off it.
Right.
There's like the miles per mile are a little bit different in a Jeep. And a Jeep Wrangler has significantly more capability than a Tacoma.
Well, I will say every time I've driven a Tacoma, it's done everything that I needed it to do.
Yeah, that's the thing. It'll do.
Right. So it wasn't necessarily noteworthy.
Yeah.
And it was very reliable.
Sure.
And it did what I wanted it to do. And so maybe it met all the expectations, so I didn't think twice about it.
And I think for me, like our businesses started with this 2004 white Tacoma build that we did
you drove to the Arctic
a long time ago. Yeah, and I drove it up to Tuktoyaktuk before people were really doing that.
Right.
It drove all the way down to Panama and the Darien Gap. Like the vehicle was grossly overloaded.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about that, and I made a ton of mistakes.
Didn't you put a spare fuel tank on it?
I did.
From an Isuzu Trooper?
I did, and that was one of the things that I did to the vehicle that was actually really beneficial.
Right.
Everything else is probably a little bit questionable, my choices in modifications. That's a great example of learning the hard way about stuff.
It'd be interesting to see you rebuild that same vehicle today.
Yeah, and I've thought about it. I've really thought
What
hard.
would you do different?
I've really thought hard about kind of to celebrate 20 years of our business that we either do another Tacoma or we do a Gladiator or something like that, kind of the same type of vehicle, and then how would I do it differently, which is pretty much I wouldn't do anything
Hey,
to it.
Toyota, I absolutely love the Tacoma, and we've got this great idea.
Yeah. So the new Tacoma Land Cruiser, those are really noteworthy things. They're really popular, and they're going to just be super popular for our audience. Another really big new announcement is the Scout Yoho Pop Up camper, and I'm a big fan of Scout. I have had the Scout Kenai on a GMC AT4 1500, and I just purchased a Yoho Pop Up. They just have come into the market. So think of like any of the other pop ups that you see on the market, a 4-wheel camper or whatever. So this is going to be a composite sided lifting roof. So you're going to gain a lot of clearance under trees, into parking garages or airports or whatever else that you're going into. It's much lower. The camper's also very light. So the way that I've spec'd it, which is basically nothing in it, is going to be around 900 pounds. So
it's very light.
It's very lightweight, and it's surprisingly roomy inside. When I first saw it, I'm like, this is going to be the camper I'm going to want to have for a really long time. Because I would like to go back to a mid-size vehicle. I really like to drive challenging terrain because it gets me away from everybody else.
Well, it's hard to do with a big slide-in.
It is, and I experienced that. It was a challenge. Like there was times it was taking everything that I had to get that poor AT4 and that giant camper
with
through
the Kenai.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was just a big rig going down the trail. So having the pop-up is going to be great. It'll fit in a container. So now I'm trying to decide what platform do I want to put it on. So I'm looking at, do I want to put it on a Gladiator? Do I want to put it on like an AT4X AEV Canyon with the factory 35s? Do I want to? I mean, it's currently on an Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster, and it looks so good. Like we're going to put a picture here in the podcast.
It does look good. The lines surprised me.
Yeah.
The line, because there's so much because of the way the Quartermaster bed is, there's a lot of exposed kind of underside of the camper.
Oh yeah, true.
Right?
Yeah.
So you see, just in the way that we've got it configured now, in my opinion, you see a lot of the underside and you see a lot of these hard angles.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times you're used to the pop-up kind of having this seamless transition onto the pickup truck bed.
Very true. And the main reason for that is the height of the cab on the Quartermaster is so tall.
Right.
So the camper has to be built up.
Yeah.
Has to be raised up in order to fit over the cab. And right now it is a very tight fit, even at the height that it's at.
Yeah.
So, but I'm very excited about the camper. I mean, I bought it personally because I just am super excited about it. So.
Yeah, that's a big deal for you to
throwing down writing my own check for that one because it's what I want. It's a company that I believe in. I think that their products are great, and there's lots of great camper companies on the market. It's just this particular configuration doesn't exist. It's exactly what I wanted. It's a 6-foot camper that'll go into a 5-foot bed, mid-size pickup, and it's going to be perfect for me.
We get a lot of campers in for testing. We still get a lot of campers in for testing. We have a lot of campers, that we're looking forward to testing over the next year. And it's kind of neat when, you've got enough experience with all the different products on the market that you find the one that just fits you personally.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though you're still like, we'll still review all the others and take a look at them, but it's probably personally relieving to be like, yeah, this is the one that I really identify with.
Yeah, and it's also important. That's why I pay for it, is because I don't want to have a conflict of interest, either with that camper or with testing other campers.
Right.
So because there are some, like a 4-wheel camper is an exceptional product.
Right.
And they make incredible solutions for like tray beds and all of that. And the Overland Explorer camper, like OEX, is that what the right one?
OEV.
OEV.
Yeah.
Overland Explorer vehicles. Yeah. Yeah, so they make composite, hard-sided slide-ins. They just don't make one in this particular configuration yet. So
yeah, and I think it really comes down to the vehicle and the application, and weight limits, and every vehicle and every person is going to be different with it.
Yeah, totally. It's all like anything. It's personal. It's like you like your Wrangler, and other people like their Tacoma. Yeah, it's like different things for different people.
I have a love-hate relationship with my Wrangler.
What do you hate about it?
It's a great truck. I don't like the internal roll cage and the.
You're right. It does steal a lot of space.
It's so much wasted space.
That's so true.
So much wasted space, and then there's also been I've got a very short list of little things that. Ever since getting it new, things that just kind of things that on the vehicle that should last forever.
Yeah. You've had differential problems.
Yeah, the rear differential and that limited slip deal that it's got. Because I got the Sport.
Yeah.
Because I knew I was going to change out.
Yeah.
All the things that you get with the Rubicon, except for the locker, right? And so, with that one, I mean, it's got little things about it that just feel like they should last forever, and they're not.
Yeah, sure.
But it's changing because our use case scenario with it is changing.
Sure.
When I tried to shoehorn 4 people into it, it was very challenging. And now if I'm putting 2 or 3 people in it, it's like, okay, it makes a little bit more sense.
It's a great looking vehicle though. We've used it a lot.
Yeah, mine looks really good.
I like that's because it's got Brian McVickers style.
I didn't intend for it to be that way either. It just kind of all fell into place.
It looks good.
It kind of was like that gray on gray on gray.
I like it. But I like the gray gray man program.
Yeah.
All right. So another thing I wanted to talk about is, and I'm going to put it in the camper, is this new EcoFlow air conditioner and heater. So
it's all in one unit?
It's an all-in-one unit. So it's the first time I've seen, I'm sure that they exist, but it's the first time that I've seen a 12-volt air conditioning system that is also a heater. So I'm going to install that in the Yoho Pop Up, and it makes 6,100 BTUs of heat, and it makes 5,100 BTUs of AC.
And how big is it in comparison to, I don't know, like a front runner wolf box or something like that?
It's taller than that, so it's fairly tall. Where the space actually gets used up is when you start putting the vents and stuff, like all the tubing, because you have to, because it's a true air conditioning system, you have to vent out the heat, or if you're using it as a heater, you have to run the tubing into the.
So is it like 2 jerry cans side by side, space wise? I've never seen it.
Yeah. We should have it up on the table. It's not that big. It's like the size of a carry-on piece of luggage.
Oh, okay.
So if you had like a Pelican case that you were using as a carry-on, the maximum size of a carry-on of a Pelican case, it's a little taller than that and a little wider than that, but not by much. Okay. It's not that big. And then there's a battery pack that you can mount to the bottom of it if you want, or you can just wire it into hardwire it into your auxiliary power system.
Nice.
So that's going to be a really interesting solution. It's testing. We're trying something new. You have to have a lot of battery capacity in order to heat a camper, but it'll be interesting to see how it works. I don't think I wouldn't be using the heater overnight. It would be like when you get up in the morning and it's just cold in the camper. You fire that thing up and
take the edge off.
So
that same company, I think, they've got a couple of things. They've got a refrigerator with a built-in battery.
That's right.
They've got a
portable power systems, a bunch of those, and
they've got a really good one that's I think their portable power system's also capable of jump starting a vehicle.
Yeah. They've got a bunch of really great solutions, and I'm just excited to try this out. Like it's pretty cool concept, and we'll see how it works. We'll report back on if it was actually a good idea or not. So we got that, and then we've also been taking a look at the new Engel fridge slides that came out. Engel fridges have been around for a very long time. The very first fridge that I ever purchased for travel was an Engel. And I remember that when I bought it used, And I asked the guy that I bought it from, how long has he had it? And he's like, I don't remember. It's just been running in my garage, keeping his beer cold. And you actually ended up with that fridge.
I still have that fridge. That fridge is in my garage, keeping the beer cold. And
so think about how long that thing has been running.
It's been around for a long time. And it's an old one.
Because I had, that had to have been 24 years ago or so that I bought that fridge. And the guy, like I said, the guy that I got it from, he didn't know how long he had it.
Yeah. I bet I could look at it. There's probably a serial number on it or some way to find out how old it is. But it still works.
But that's not an uncommon thing with Engels, the way that little swing motor works.
Yeah. It's rough around the edges.
I'm sure.
It's got some parts falling off.
Yeah, sure. That is the one.
It still turns on.
That's the one thing with an Engel is it's a really good idea to put a carrying case, a case on it, because the metal can get really beat up. Yeah. Like most of the fridges now are plastic, so they endure all that a little bit better. Or like even the National Lunas with the way that the metal is dimpled.
Yeah, but it's a little heavier too.
Yeah, for sure.
The new ones are quite a bit lighter.
But the Engel fridges are great. They make a 35. That's like one of my favorite sizes. They're overall much smaller. They're much lighter. Their startup amperage is much lower. They're probably comparable with a National Luna for efficiency. The National Luna probably has a little bit of an edge on efficiency, but if you're trying to like plug it into your factory wiring harness in the back of a 4Runner or something, the Engel will not require a wiring upgrade because the startup amperage is so low with that motor style.
Yeah, I've plugged fridges into the back of vehicles and they just won't even turn on because there's not enough amperage
exactly
to even get them to start up.
Exactly, yeah, the wire diameter is too small.
One of the things I like about that Engel as well, and other companies might do this, but the difference between the 35 and the 45, which is when you're the consumer trying to decide which size do I go with, right? That seems to be a pretty common size because the next jump up is like a 60.
Yeah, sure.
So the footprint of the 35 and the 45 is the same.
It is, just the height.
It's just the height.
Yeah.
And maybe other companies do that too. I haven't studied everybody's numbers, but I did notice that when we were looking at the Engels, that it's same footprint, just a little bit taller.
Yeah, they're just one of the best fridges ever made. And like, look, things still working that I sold you. I sold you the first thing I sold you was a welder.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I sold you was a fridge. You probably don't have the welder anymore, but
no, I got rid of the welder.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything new coming up for you? What's next for Brian McVickers?
On my side of things, it is we got SEMA coming up.
Yep.
Actually, in 2 weeks. I'll be up in Montana, in Missoula, Montana, at the Outdoor Media Summit.
Awesome.
And so I'll be there it's like a 3-day event, and they had some space on Wednesday. They wanted to do some nap time. They wanted to put everybody to sleep, so they asked me to be a guest speaker, and so I'll be there doing a little guest speaking.
Awesome.
We'll be talking about creating a community through online forums.
Nice.
Which is something that we've been doing for the past forever.
For 20 years.
For 20 years, with the Overland or with the expeditionportal.com forum.
That's right.
And so we'll talk about forums and how they're significantly different than social media today, right? And one of the big takeaways is with social media, it's almost this transient engagement, right? You can like, you can smile, you can high five, you can make a little comment, and then it like disappears into the ether.
That's right.
Like, have you ever tried you see something on Instagram or you see something on Facebook?
It's hard to find it.
It pops up in the feed. Have you ever tried to go back and find it?
Yeah, it's hard.
Nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Whereas with a forum, you can have a little bit higher elevated dialogue with other people.
Yeah.
And then it's all archived. It's all searchable. You can go back and look for information, do research. You can go back to the same conversation again. There's a lot of benefits.
We have threads with over 1 million views,
right,
and thousands of comments.
Yeah.
So
they really the forums, even though compared to a social media network, forums kind of feel a little bit old school, but in reality, they're this repository of information.
And it's very community centric. It's everybody that has an interest in overland travel, they all come to Expedition Portal and they get to talk about that very specific subject. Whereas a platform like Facebook, someone's maybe looking at coffee 1 minute and then they're looking at trucks the next, and it's kind of all of it, which they both have their place. It's just recognizing that that having these expert voices and this repository of information is very beneficial to a community. So.
So I'm looking forward to that event.
Awesome.
I've been wanting to go to that event for several years.
Cool.
And then after that, we're right into SEMA.
Yeah, I know.
And SEMA's a month away. So we'll go into SEMA, and then, we're already planning for 2025. In fact, we're just got a lot of different ideas for 2025, and we're trying to figure out what ideas we're gonna implement. We're working with a lot of really amazing companies coming into next year. And so there's a lot to look forward to I'd say definitely over the next 2 months as we're planning. And then, fast forward, you get into early January. I'm going to get back to CES show, the Consumer Electronics Show, very, very early January. Then there's the SHOT Show, which you
always fun.
Got to go to the SHOT Show.
You just like Range Day.
Oh, Range Day's the best. Range Day on Monday. And so then, after that, we're, full force into 2025. So it's
crazy to think. And that'll be the 20th anniversary of Expedition Portal.
That's right.
Pretty incredible how it's all coming together. So
it'll be a big
deal. Doesn't feel like 20 years, but that's how quickly life goes by.
Oh no, I woke up the other morning. I was like, 20 years. Like my back hurts.
And I guess that all comes full circle with the start of the conversation of, time flies by. And let's just be really mindful of where we spend it, and like keep track of where you're spending your time, because you might still have that book in you. So.
But I got to, back to the kind of the business and market, idea that we kind of started talking about, and which we kind of tend to at least dedicate one podcast to every quarter.
I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support.
I was talking with a company earlier today, and they were kind of like, well, what's the state of the market, state of the industry? Like, where is everything going? Where are the consumers going? Where are the businesses going? And I really think that you get the ups and downs and the slowdowns and the speed ups, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think when you're looking at the category and the practice and the activity of overlanding, I genuinely feel like we've got another 20 years in us at least, right?
For sure.
You're seeing we're still seeing OEMs bringing vehicles to market specifically targeted and manufactured and designed around overlanding. Right?
Yeah. And that's how you know it's actually the start of a general consumer interest in this space.
Yeah.
So we've been doing it for 20 years, so it feels like things have been happening for a long time. But you're just now getting overland-specific models, like the Grenadier coming out. It's just recent that those vehicles have been launched.
Well, you were on TV the other day.
I was.
What was it?
CBS.
CBS,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
CBS News live on TV.
Yeah, exactly. That was fun.
And they wanted to talk about overland.
They did. Yeah,
and so all of a sudden, it's little by little, the idea gains traction and it spreads.
Yeah, it does.
I'm feeling really positive going into next year.
Yeah, and the reality is that travel is rapidly growing as a segment, and overlanding is travel. It's important to remember that at the end of the day, despite the fact that we have cool cars, the whole reason that the car exists is to transport us to some unique place.
Yeah.
So overlanding is travel, and that's an important distinction between that and off-roading, which is recreational sport, recreational motorsport. And then you have camping, which is, or car camping, which is just camping,
Well, and overlanding kind of folds everything together.
It does. So overlanding is really about travel. That remains our focus. So as the industry may dabble with other interpretations of what that may mean, we recognize that travel is the most important part of it. Doesn't mean we don't do all the other things, but the reason why I overland, the reason why you overland, and the majority of people in the marketplace is so they can go see something cool.
Yeah. Another litmus test that I use very, very lightly is the events.
Yeah.
So if the event space is growing and people are attending the events, that's usually a good sign of consumer adoption of an idea.
And do we even know how many Overland events there are now?
Yes.
50?
No, last year. So this year there were over 100.
Wow.
Last year there were 68.
Yeah, sure.
So 2023 there were 68. This year there were over 100. I'm actually compiling the list of 2025 events now.
Yeah.
And it's still growing.
Yep.
Right. And so you've got these events like, well, we're all familiar with the Overland Expos.
And they just announced their Los Angeles show.
They just announced a 5th show going into California around the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
I don't know a whole lot of details about it, but
Yeah.
the fact that that's a very natural extension for them
Sure.
to go into that area of the country.
Yeah.
But the latest one, the Overland of the Americas show that happened in Oklahoma, huge success.
Awesome.
And that one was a little bit different from, say, like the Overland Expos. This one they had swimming pools and sit-down restaurants, and I think they even had one of those, the Barbie Jeep downhill run. It was very much like this activity-packed event, and they knocked it out of the park. It was a great event, a first-year event. So we're looking for even bigger and better things for those guys next year.
Yeah, sure.
The More Expo is doing really well.
Yep.
They're 4 or 5 years into it and continuing to grow.
Yep.
And there's a few others popping up around the country. And what we're seeing is new events from new groups are filling in the blanks, right? They're looking at the map and saying, hey, we don't have an Overland event within a 5-hour drive of our city.
Yeah.
And so they're creating regional events, and they're getting a lot of traction. They're getting a lot of attendance.
Yeah,
So-
it's exciting times, and I look forward to seeing what 2025 is going to bring.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in a month or so to have another roundup of Overland news.
Sounds great. Right after SEMA, I think.
That's right, exactly. Well, thanks for being on the podcast, Brian,
You bet.
and we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.